I would see law as always being embedded in the cultural, right? So it's always embedded within society. It's always embedded in relationships with people, us, the people. And there are a number of ways in which culture can influence law. One, on the populace at large, so through citizens, through voting, through legislation that's then passed by Parliament. It can influence judges, it can influence all of us. And science fiction sends particular messages, I think, about law and about danger and things that we should avoid and things that we should do. So whether that's our relationships with aliens, let's say, or cloning technologies, or even pandemic viruses, science fiction tells us messages that are then introduced into the way that we think about law and regulation. So I think it has a great deal to tell us about law and legal issues. When we're thinking about science fiction, I don't expect it to come and tell me about a Consumer Credit Act or a particular statutory piece of law. It can do, that does happen. But I think what it does is send us deeper justice-based issues that we should be thinking about. So how do we deal with a particular situation? What would be the just thing to do? And it can highlight as well injustices within our society. And I think there's a good long tradition now, developing tradition, looking at science fiction texts that highlight inequalities within our society and have really palpable things to say. And I think that's the sort of message that it can send. I've been watching the Squid Games recently. That's one of the most popular franchises ever to happen on Netflix. It's a fantastic series set in South Korea. But that also raises really important messages about inequality and about debt and about the lengths that people will go to get them outside of these debts and all sorts of things. So I think these messages about justice are much broader and much more directly relatable to lay people. If I ask someone about what they think about Plato or Kant or St. Thomas Aquinas, they might not know. But if I ask them what they thought about the Squid Games, they're much more likely to know. So I think it places these questions of justice much more centrally with the populace at large, which is broadly what William McNeill's written in his book Lex Populi, which came out in 2007. But I think science fiction specifically sends really important messages about what we want our futures to look like. Do we want them to be a utopia, or can we learn from the dystopias that they often present us with in order to change our behaviors now? Yeah, so I want to just quickly mention about law, because I think there's an issue of temporality here. That's what I'm really interested in. So law is a backwards looking discipline, right? If we think about the way that precedent works and the way that legislation works, we're looking to the past in order to make sure our behavior is regulated. So primarily backwards looking discipline. Those great philosophers who've written on justice are looking forwards. The temporal register is futuristic in the sense that they're thinking about what would a utopian state look like. So Plato is writing about a future that he wants to see. Marx is writing about a future that he wants to see. Feminist theory and critical race theory, they're writing about a different future, a future that could be, or a future that ought to be. And it's that temporal register that I think places it in the same realm as science fiction, because that's what science fiction is doing. It's looking to the future to think about the kind of societies we could have. They could be good, they could be bad, but it's looking in that sort of futuristic direction. So that's probably why I prefer this divorce from law and justice when I'm talking about this issue, because I do see legal theory as being science fiction. If you're writing about the future, I would say that that's science fiction. So I would place all of them squarely in that genre. What science fiction seems to be pointing towards at the moment, or the popular piece of science fiction is, or the concerns of it perhaps, is about deepening inequalities. That those inequalities are rather than getting better, rather than heading towards the utopian future that we want to see and that philosophers want to see, we're heading to something much darker. It's going to get worse perhaps before it gets better. And that's, yeah, probably my concern. I'd love to offer something much more hopeful and much more happy here. But I'm afraid at present, you know, with the shifts towards populism, and the you know, I don't want to be too disparaging of the UK where I'm from, but I don't see much hope at present for really addressing the inequalities that society faces today.
Yeah.